Now this reflection is also a kind of thinking, and it has certain objects. And this is one of the things that we can also think about, which is the fact that we as a thinking subject think about certain objects. So reflection is thinking about things in our own past, for example. Or we can reflect about a situation at work. We do all kinds of thinking all the time. It just goes on and on and on and on. All we're doing when we get into the exceptional state is we're turning around and we're looking at this. In the normal course of our day, we need to be very active doing whatever we're doing, you know. You get up in the morning and you got to get your children out of the house, and if you're concentrating on that, and then you get in the car, you have to be concentrating on that. You got no business wandering off into thinking about thinking at that point, you know. When you want to do this thinking about thinking that's got experiments in it and stuff, you need to stop your other activities so you can be as much as possible paying attention. Okay. Now there are lots of books to inspire us to have things to be concerned about, you might say, as we develop our introspective life. As we learn to shine the light, our thinking is kind of a light that shines on this subject matter. Our subjectivity has a capacity through thinking to shine light on the object of our thinking. Okay? And when we shine the light of our thinking on the object of thinking, we illuminate it. And in its illumination, we produce then what we know and what we understand and what we believe and all of that. Okay? And there's no rushing this. There's no going out and having an experiment and maybe we didn't like it and it's failed and I give up. You know, what happens when you take up the sort of scientific investigation of your own mind via introspection is you just simply begin to understand how to do that, how to turn around and look at that stuff. There's no particular way it has to unfold. In reality, there's just your way. Now you can inform your way with the wisdom of other people who have already done this, and if you're a serious anthropop, you can use GA 2, 3, and 4 as a means to ask questions about your inner life. For example, in Theory of Knowledge, she talks about thought and experience, and you can then sit down in the quietude and reflect. Oh, what's experience? What's thought? And that's that turning around. That's being in that exceptional state and beginning to look at how these things actually happen. It's not about taking the book and studying it and trying to drum into your head what Steiner said. It's what you say when you think about your interior life. Okay? It's not what Steiner said. And he didn't really want us to do that. But in the beginning, and since we're involved in the over-time incarnation of anthroposophy, and since anthroposophy is this path of knowledge, you know, Steiner kicks it off in a certain direction, and it's not like the kickoff is invalid. We're going to come to that next. I'm just, trying to make sure that we don't lose sight of certain things. Now, when I was talking about this kind of thinking, I talked about, the discursive dialogue, this inner wording, and I talked about the mental pictures that are also all mixed up in that, and the feelings and the will element and so on and so forth. And eventually, over time, you'll begin to see yourself as an actor in that world begin to do things. You'll notice something and you'll say, oh, well, I want to do it this way rather than that way. And then a year later, you can reflect back and you can say, well, my goodness, what did I learn? I learned some interesting stuff about myself. And I also began to notice other people, and I noticed things in the books, and I've been putting this all together, and by God, I'm getting pretty smart about it. And yes, you will get real smart about it. Okay? A path of knowledge. Well, on the path, you get knowledge. And you get knowledge by having experience. And when you turn around in the exceptional state and look at yourself, you begin to gather experience. And you can't get it from the book. Okay? Now, there existed at the time that Steiner wrote The Philosophy of Freedom, in contemporary philosophy, in the world of philosophy of which he was a part of, a kind of discussion of a problem that still exists today. And we could call this different things. I'm going to call it the deterministic problem. And that's whether who we are and what we are is determined by things outside ourselves, or whether we can determine things from in ourselves. And of course the philosophy of freedom is about freedom. It's about whether or not we determine or other things determine. And when Steiner writes the first chapter of the philosophy of freedom, he begins with the problem of desire. He says, can we want what we want? Okay. So one of the things that one can observe when you turn around in the exceptional state and look at yourself is desire. You know? And I talked about this a little bit in the shadow, and I talk about it more when I talk about it in the Redemption of Eros segment of my video work and in my writings, because the problem of desire, the problem of the mystery of evil and the mission of evil is a very significant problem. Okay, and in the age of the conscious snowl, in the age of the consciousness soul, we have to wake up to what comes through us into the world, because we need to take responsibility for it. And it doesn't make us bad. In fact, the waking up is like part of the adventure of learning to spiritualize our thinking, which is what GA 2, 3, and 4 are about, spiritualizing our thinking. We don't spiritualize our thinking by what we think, by absorbing everything Steiner ever wrote. We spiritualize our thinking by our own activity in thinking, by the activity of our I in our thinking. That waking up activity of our I is what spiritualizes our thinking. Or, to use a different word than spiritualize, we could say moralize. Because where Steiner gets, once he gets into the problem of can I want what I want, well, he says, well, the way you want what you can want what you want is you insert a moral idea in between the want and the acting out on the want. And to do that, you need to understand what I talk about later in moral imagination, moral intuition, and moral technique. All of which are his clues to the fact that in our subjectivity we engage in certain kinds of things. And in the age of the consciousness soul, we're already doing certain things. And if you're an American, you have a kind of disadvantage and an advantage. You have a stronger shadow, and you also have an instinct for anthroposophy. You're naturally an anthroposophist, and you're also instinctively in the consciousness soul and your life of rights. And all of this can be food for your self-understanding. You can notice maybe, for example, that you're really passionate about what goes on in politics. You really care about the Gulf oil catastrophe, which is happening at the time that I'm creating these videos, etc., etc., etc. You worry about the world. Well, one of the things you can understand about yourself is that act within you, that aspect of your nature that manifests itself in this worry about the world and this want to help the world. And all of this is part of the consciousness soul, which is a preparation for something later, which Steiner writes about. So, gotta pause.